You know, I've mentioned factions before, so I wanted to try to educate people on how dangerous factions are and what they are. Because I think people think when I say, well, they're a faction on the left or they're a faction on the right, that I'm referring to the political party. No. The 1776 founders said, many of them said, this is why they said they didn't think the Constitution would last, because the factions will destroy the Constitution, because factions pull apart the threads of the Constitution little by little. So what factions are is they're predators, okay? And they're predators, they're parasites. They are parasites in the sense that they attach themselves to a party. But here's how they're un-American. And they're on both sides. The left doesn't really ever claim to love America. So, it's easy to see they're not patriotic. The ones that are harder to see is like Turning Point, okay? Because Charlie Kirk presented himself that he was about traditional values and that he loved America. So if you love America, then you would respect our Constitution and you wouldn't form a faction. A faction they're predatory because, and this is why I say they don't care. Even Turning Point didn't care about America. Charlie Kirk didn't. What the factions do, it doesn't matter if it's the Black Panthers in the 60s, Weather Underground in the 60s, Student Democratic Socialist Society, the Communist Socialist Revolt, whatever it is, okay? Turning Point USA. You'll always see them. They're very easy to see because they're only interested because they're predators. They're just not predators in a sexual way. They're predators in that they know they can influence the youth. That's all they care about. Any faction on the left and the right, just pay attention. That is who they focus on. Why do you think that so many of the left and the right go on these college campuses and get chapters going? Because the youth in their formative years, there's a scientific reason they do it. It's because they know, like in Charlie Kirk's case or LGB's case, they know that they can influence, manipulate, and mold the mind of the youth. That's why it's predatory. Because the youth's that especially like let's take Charlie Kirk or LGB with Gen Z. Gen Z was their focus. It's always whoever the youth is in their formative years. Because if they can mold them into what they want, then they got them. They got their claws in them. That's why it's predatory. That's the reason they are all over the college campuses. That is the reason they destroy the Constitution. So the Turning Point and Charlie Kirk, everybody would say, well, he was for America. No, he wasn't. Because if you love America, then you would respect what our founders said about factions. Because that is what has slowly torn the fabric of the Constitution apart. And here's why. Because they only care about the demographic they're going after. So they're predatory. There's parasites that attach themselves to one of the parties. And then because they get so much influence on the college campuses, and in Kirk's case, he was in the high schools even before the college campuses, they end up becoming more powerful than the very person that's running. And what sucks, okay, is that we don't really have any politicians on any side that really respect the Constitution, in my opinion, either, because they all will go to these organizations and speak, okay? And they can make all the excuses they want, but literally, if you look it up, I think it was Benjamin Franklin, Washington, there were several of the earliest founders that said the factions will destroy the Constitution. It's little by little. They tear it apart. But most people thought with Turning Point and Charlie Kirk, well, no, he's about America first and he's about traditional values. No, he started out as a never Trumper. But when he saw that it was going to go to Trump in 2017, he quickly, because he's a bullshit artist, he quickly invented himself. I mean, he was always on the Republican side. But that doesn't mean they're not patriotic Americans. I don't care what I don't even care what Donald Trump were to say. Because literally, that's what I've seen with these factions. They destroy our Constitution. These people are not about everybody in America. So to then call yourself that you love America, you're a bullshitter, okay? Because you only care about the youth. Turning Point especially, oh, they were living the life, okay? Charlie Kirk was, because he had millennials and Gen Z. That would be like 174 million. And you may think, well, he got it away from LGB and the left. They're not any better though. Because they're not a politician. They just want control. Here's why. Because once they have enough control and you have most of the youth following Charlie Kirk, then it's not about who's in office. Because what they'll do, what that faction will do, will then go on to pressure whoever's in office that you better do this. It's a subtle pressure. Charlie Kirk did this right after Trump got elected. He went on Tucker Carlson and he said, Trump's got to do something to help Gen Z get better opportunities and houses. And I thought, oh, you bastard. I mean, I knew he was full of shit, but I thought everybody would see who he was then. No. What ended up happening? Your podcasters, Marjorie Taylor Greene, started this vomitous saying the same thing. Yeah, my kids, and what are their opportunities, and them getting a house, and the American. And I'm like, oh, you people are such assholes, okay? Like, none of you love the Constitution. If you love the Constitution, you wouldn't form a faction, because the faction only cares about one demographic. It doesn't care about anybody else. So how they called themselves being America first or being patriotic Americans is beyond me, because none of them are. But this is what they've been doing forever. I mean, definitely heavily since the 60s. And Charlie Kirk was an example of somebody who had so much power because he had millennials and Gen Z. And every Republican would say, but he was pushing God and traditional values. That's not where his destination was going to go. And you shouldn't say that you love America when you only care about a certain demographic. Then you don't love America. But what people say is that no, well, in order to get the youth away from the left, you got to have somebody that's of youth. No, you don't. If factions could somehow, and there's no way to do it, but if factions were eliminated, then you'd actually have the system operate the way that it should. Then the politicians don't get in with these factions. Then the politicians are just working for the people. Instead, they get in with these people. The podcasters do. Tech showed their hand that because tech, like I said, how Gen X can't get manipulated. A ton of tech giants are Gen X, okay? But they swing really more to the left, but they'll swing right to serve their goals, okay? But you saw who tech was prior to the 2020 election and the 2024 election, when they were taking down tons of Trump supporters, especially Gen Xers, but all that was in our feed was Charlie Kirk, Charlie Kirk, Charlie Kirk. So that told me right then and there too who Charlie Kirk was, because they were doing that. Because the goal is we're going to act like we're about America, and then, especially with Trump, this time they were just like, we're going to run Trump's 4 years out, then we're going to have control. And that's when you have control of the millennials and Gen Z, that's 174 million Americans. You run the show. That's why it's nothing close to being patriotic. It's un-American. Don't call yourself America first. Don't call yourself a loving, patriotic American. if you form a faction. You hate America if you form a faction.